The crystal chandeliers of the Meridian Club cast elegant shadows across Manhattan's most exclusive dinner party when three armed men burst through the service entrance. Billionaire tech CEO Amara Valine found herself staring down the barrel of a gun as chaos erupted around the room's most powerful executives. But what happened next would change everything, because the quiet waiter who'd been serving champagne suddenly moved with the lethal precision of a trained killer, neutralizing all three hijackers in under 30 seconds. Would you believe that an ordinary single father working double shifts to support his young son could possess skills that elite military units spend years developing? Stay with us, because the truth about Kelvin Verlow's identity will leave you speechless. This is the incredible story of how one moment of courage transformed two lives forever, and why the most powerful woman in Silicon Valley made an offer that would shock the business world. What you're about to discover will prove that heroes aren't born in boardrooms or mansions, but forged in the quiet determination of everyday people who refuse to stand by when others need help. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Meridian Club's grand ballroom sparkled with the kind of opulence that only Manhattan's elite could afford. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's homes cast dancing light across tables adorned with rare orchids and gold-rimmed china. The annual Tech Innovation Gala drew the most powerful figures in Silicon Valley to New York's most exclusive venue, where deals worth billions were negotiated over 7-course meals and vintage champagne. Kelvin Verlow moved between the tables. With practiced invisibility, his black uniform pressed to perfection, his movements economical and precise. At 34, he'd perfected the art of serving without being seen, of anticipating needs before they were voiced, of maintaining the kind of professional demeanor that made wealthy patrons feel comfortable discussing sensitive matters in his presence. Tonight's guest list read like a who's who of global technology leaders, venture capitalists, and government officials whose decisions shaped the digital future of humanity. The evening had proceeded flawlessly until 9:47 p.m., when three men in dark tactical gear burst through the service entrance with military precision. Their faces were concealed behind black masks, their movements coordinated with the efficiency of professionals who had rehearsed this exact scenario multiple times. The first man immediately sealed the main exits while the second began herding the terrified guests toward the center of the room. The third made a direct line toward the head table where Amara Valine, CEO of Quantum Dynamics and the evening's keynote speaker, sat frozen in her chair. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and absolute. Conversations died mid-sentence as champagne glasses slipped from trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Women in designer gowns pressed themselves against the walls while men in $1,000 suits raised their hands in surrender, their faces pale with the kind of fear that money couldn't protect them from. The soft jazz music continued playing from hidden speakers, creating a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding nightmare. "Nobody moves, nobody dies," the lead hijacker announced, his voice amplified by a small electronic device that gave his words an otherworldly quality. "We're here for one person only. The rest of you are just witnesses." Kelvin had been refilling water glasses at table 12 when the intrusion began. His first instinct was the same as every other civilian in the room: freeze, assess, survive. But as he watched the third hijacker approach Amara Valine with purposeful intent, something deeper awakened in his mind. The way they moved, the precision of their entry, the tactical awareness they displayed. These weren't common criminals motivated by money. This was a professional operation with specific objectives, which meant Amara wasn't just in immediate danger. She was the primary target of something much larger and more dangerous. The lead hijacker grabbed Amara's wrist with brutal efficiency, yanking her to her feet as she cried out in pain. Her elegant black evening gown tore slightly at the shoulder. as he forced her toward the service entrance. "Miss Valen will be coming with us," he announced to the room. "Anyone who follows or calls for help in the next 30 minutes will ensure she doesn't survive the experience." That's when Kelvin moved. Years of buried training surged through his nervous system like electricity finding a conductor. His body responded with muscle memory that transcended conscious thought, moving with the fluid precision of someone who had once navigated far more dangerous situations than a Manhattan ballroom. He approached from the hijacker's blind spot, using the chaos and terror of the other guests as cover. His footsteps silent against the marble floor. The takedown was textbook perfect. Kelvin's left hand secured the hijacker's weapon arm, while his right delivered a precise strike to the carotid sinus, inducing immediate unconsciousness without permanent damage. The man collapsed before he could process what was happening, his grip on Amara releasing instantly. The second hijacker spun toward the commotion, but Kelvin was already moving, using the fallen man's weapon in a disarming technique that left the second attacker stunned and weaponless on the floor. The third hijacker, the one controlling the exits, made the mistake of dividing his attention between the crowd and the unexpected threat. Kelvin covered the distance between them in 3 efficient strides, using a combination of redirection and controlled force that neutralized the final threat without firing a single shot or causing any injury to the terrified guests. The entire confrontation lasted 23 seconds. Silence descended over the ballroom like a heavy curtain, broken only by the sound of expensive shoes shifting against marble and the continued soft jazz emanating from speakers that seemed to mock the violence that had just occurred. Kelvin stood among the 3 unconscious figures, his chest rising and falling with controlled breathing, his eyes already scanning for additional threats that might not have revealed themselves yet. Amara Valen stared at him with a mixture of shock, gratitude, and something else, a sharp intelligence that was already processing what she had witnessed. Her dark hair had come loose from its elegant updo during the struggle, and there was a small bruise forming on her wrist where the hijacker had grabbed her, but otherwise she appeared unharmed. "Are you hurt?" Kelvin asked, his voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. "No," she replied, her voice steadier than he'd expected. "Thank you." That was remarkable. But even as she spoke, Kelvin could see questions forming in her intelligent brown eyes. Questions about how a waiter had moved with the precision of elite military personnel. Questions about the specific techniques he'd used to neutralize trained professionals without causing permanent harm. Questions about who he really was and why someone with his obvious capabilities was serving champagne at corporate dinner parties. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. The other guests remained frozen in place, unsure whether the danger had truly passed or if this was merely a temporary reprieve. Several had their phones out, recording video that would undoubtedly appear on social media within minutes. But their cameras had been focused on the chaos rather than Kelvin's specific actions. "The police will want statements," Amara said, straightening her torn dress with unconscious dignity. "I'll make sure they understand you're a hero." Kelvin nodded once, but something in his expression suggested that heroism was not how he would describe what had just occurred. To him, it had simply been necessary. Someone had needed help, and he had possessed the skills to provide it. The fact that those skills raised uncomfortable questions about his background was a complication he would deal with later. As the first police officers burst through the main entrance, weapons drawn and voices shouting commands, Kelvin stepped back into the shadows near the service station. Not hiding, exactly, but resuming the invisibility that had defined his civilian life for the past several years. He had done what needed to be done, but the attention that would inevitably follow was something he had hoped never to face again. What he didn't realize was that Amara Valen was not the type of person to let heroism go unnoticed or unrewarded. And what she had witnessed in those 23 seconds had revealed Possibilities that would change both of their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. Amara Valen had built quantum dynamics from a Stanford dorm room idea into a $70 billion quantum computing empire through a combination of brilliant innovation, ruthless business acumen, and an unwavering commitment to advancing human knowledge regardless of political or economic pressures. At 36, she controlled technology that governments desperately wanted to regulate and competitors would kill to possess, making her simultaneously one of the most powerful and most vulnerable people in the global tech industry. Her journey to the top had been neither linear nor easy. Born to middle-class parents in Portland, Oregon, she had displayed an early aptitude for mathematics and computer science that her public school teachers couldn't adequately nurture. Her parents, both hardworking but financially limited, had sacrificed everything to send her to a private academy where her talents could flourish. She'd graduated valedictorian at 16, earned her PhD in quantum physics from MIT at 22, and founded quantum dynamics at 24 with nothing but theoretical models and an unshakable belief that quantum computing could solve humanity's most pressing challenges. The company's breakthrough had come 3 years later, when Amara's team successfully demonstrated stable quantum entanglement at room temperature, eliminating the need for the expensive cooling systems that had made quantum computers impractical for widespread use. That discovery had triggered a feeding frenzy among venture capitalists, government agencies, and technology giants who recognized that whoever controlled practical quantum computing would control the future of everything from artificial intelligence to cryptography. But Amara had refused to sell. Despite offers that would have made her the wealthiest woman in history, she had maintained controlling interest in quantum dynamics, driven by a vision that extended far beyond personal wealth. She believed quantum computing could revolutionize drug discovery, solve climate modeling challenges, break through the barriers limiting space exploration, and democratize access to computational power that could lift entire populations out of poverty. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her refusal to compromise that vision had made her powerful enemies. Traditional tech giants saw her innovations as existential threats to their market dominance. Government agencies wanted to classify her research to prevent foreign competitors from accessing breakthrough technologies. Investment firms pressured her to prioritize short-term profits over long-term scientific advancement. Foreign governments had made overtures that were equal parts partnership offers and subtle threats. 3 months ago, the pressure had escalated beyond corporate boardroom politics. A consortium led by tech mogul Lucian Tharvin had made an acquisition offer that wasn't really an offer at all. The terms were structured to gut quantum dynamics research and development division while transferring all intellectual property to companies with questionable foreign connections. When Amara had rejected the proposal, Lucian's response had been chillingly direct. "You misunderstand the nature of power in this industry," he had told her during their final meeting in his downtown offices. "Innovation without protection is just expensive curiosity. Perhaps you should consider what happens to curious people who refuse reasonable guidance." That conversation had taken place in a conference room overlooking Central Park, surrounded by lawyers and executives who treated billion-dollar negotiations like chess matches. But beneath the corporate politeness, Amara had recognized something much more dangerous: the cold calculation of someone who viewed human obstacles as problems to be eliminated rather than people to be persuaded. Since then, her security team had documented 17 separate incidents of corporate espionage, ranging from attempted server breaches to employees being approached with substantial bribes for proprietary information. Her head of security, a former federal agent named Andrea Corvale, had recommended upgrading from digital protection to physical bodyguards, but Amara had resisted. She believed that the moment she needed an armed escort to attend industry events was the moment her enemies had already won. Her presence at tonight's Tech Innovation Gala had been more than ceremonial. She was scheduled to announce quantum dynamics, partnership with the National Science Foundation to make quantum computing resources available to universities and research institutions worldwide, a decision that would democratize access to revolutionary technology while making it exponentially more difficult for any single entity to control or weaponize her innovations. The announcement would also effectively end any hope Lucian Tharvin's consortium had of acquiring quantum dynamics through traditional corporate pressure. If quantum computing became widely available through educational and research institutions, the strategic value of controlling Amara's company would diminish significantly. For someone who viewed technological dominance as a zero-sum game, her upcoming announcement represented an unacceptable threat to carefully laid plans. Amara had suspected that announcing the NSF partnership would provoke retaliation, but she had anticipated corporate lawsuits, regulatory challenges, or financial market manipulation. The possibility of physical violence at a formal dinner party, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, had seemed beyond even Lucian's calculated ruthlessness. She had been wrong. As police officers secured the ballroom and paramedics checked the unconscious hijackers for injuries, Amara found herself replaying the evening's events with the analytical precision that had made her one of the world's leading quantum physicists. The hijackers had moved with professional coordination that suggested extensive training and planning. They had bypassed the building's sophisticated security systems, indicating inside knowledge of the Meridian Club's operations. Most tellingly, they had specifically targeted her rather than demanding money or making political statements. This hadn't been a random crime or even a sophisticated kidnapping for ransom. This had been an assassination attempt disguised as an abduction, designed to eliminate her while creating plausible deniability for whoever had ordered the operation. If the hijackers had succeeded in removing her from the ballroom, she would never have been seen alive again. That realization should have terrified her, but instead crystallized her resolve. Whoever was behind tonight's attack had miscalculated badly by resorting to violence instead of continuing to work within legal and corporate frameworks. They had revealed their true nature and given her the moral justification to respond with equal determination. But they had also revealed something else. The waiter who had saved her life possessed skills that went far beyond hospitality training. The precision of his movements, the tactical awareness he had displayed, the specific techniques he had used to neutralize trained professionals, everything about his response indicated someone with extensive combat experience and specialized training. As she gave her statement to the lead detective, Amara found herself studying Kelvin Verlo with the same analytical intensity she applied to quantum mechanical problems. He answered questions with calm professionalism, providing clear facts without embellishment or emotional display. His posture remained relaxed despite being surrounded by police officers, and his eyes continued to scan the room with subtle awareness that suggested ongoing threat assessment. Most intriguingly, he deflected questions about his background with practice skill, acknowledging his military service without providing details that would satisfy a curious investigator. Everything about his demeanor suggested someone accustomed to operating in dangerous situations while maintaining operational security. About his true capabilities, Amara Valen had not built a $70 billion company by failing to recognize valuable resources when they presented themselves. And what she had witnessed tonight suggested that Kelvin Verlo represented exactly the kind of resource she was going to need if she intended to survive whatever Lucian Tharvin and his associates planned to do next. The question was whether a man who had clearly chosen anonymity over recognition would be willing to accept the kind of offer she was already beginning to formulate. Because if tonight had proven anything, it was that the battle for the future of quantum computing was no longer going to be fought exclusively in boardrooms and courthouses. Kelvin Verlow's alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m. every morning in his modest two-bedroom apartment in Ashford Heights, a working-class neighborhood in Queens where rent was affordable and neighbors minded their own business. The apartment itself was spartanly furnished but meticulously organized, books aligned perfectly on shelves, kitchen utensils arranged by frequency of use, work uniforms pressed and hanging in precise order in the closet. To a casual observer, it might have seemed obsessively neat, but to anyone familiar with military discipline, it represented the ingrained habits of someone who had learned that attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death. The most important item in the apartment wasn't visible to visitors. A framed photograph sat on his nightstand showing a beautiful woman with warm, brown eyes holding a serious-faced toddler who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Kelvin himself. Sarah and their son Mike, captured during what Kelvin now recognized as the last truly happy period of his life. He never moved the picture, never put it face down, even on the nights when sleep eluded him and the weight of loss felt unbearable. Mike was now 7 years old, a thoughtful boy with his father's quiet intensity and his mother's quick smile. He attended PS 247, a decent public school 6 blocks away where Kelvin walked him every morning before heading to his first job. Boy had adapted to their routine with the resilience that kids somehow managed to summon when circumstances demanded it. But Kelvin knew the absence of his mother remained a constant presence in their small world. "Dad, why do you have 3 jobs?" "When Tommy's dad only has one," Mike had asked the previous week while they shared breakfast in their tiny kitchen. "Because we're building something important," Kelvin had replied. The same answer he gave every time his son questioned their circumstances. "Sometimes building takes longer than we want, but it's worth doing right." Mike had accepted this explanation with the trust that 7-year-olds placed in their parents, but Kelvin knew the boy was beginning to notice things. How their clothes came from discount stores while his classmates wore brand names. How they took the subway everywhere while other families had cars. How their apartment had basic cable and generic groceries, while his friends' homes offered luxuries that seemed ordinary to everyone except them. Kelvin's first job was a morning shift at Westfield Depot, a wholesale food distribution center where he loaded delivery trucks from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. The work was physically demanding but straightforward, perfect for someone who needed to stay in shape while avoiding situations that might require explaining specialized skills to curious supervisors. His coworkers knew him as reliable, punctual, and willing to take overtime shifts that others avoided. But they also recognized something in his bearing that discouraged casual familiarity. That guy was definitely something before he started loading trucks, one of his colleagues had observed to another. "You see how he moves? Like he's always ready for something to go wrong." They weren't wrong. Years of conditioning had left Kelvin perpetually aware of his surroundings, automatically cataloging exits, potential threats, and strategic advantages regardless of where he found himself. It was an exhausting way to live, but the habits were so deeply ingrained that conscious effort was required to suppress them rather than maintain them. His second job was afternoon shifts at the Meridian Club, where he worked as a server for private events and formal dinners. The position paid significantly better than the warehouse work, but it required a different kind of endurance, the psychological stamina needed to remain invisible while surrounded by people whose daily decisions affected millions of lives and billions of dollars. He had taken the job initially because the flexible scheduling allowed him to be home when Mike returned from school, but he had discovered an unexpected benefit in the mental discipline required to serve people whose problems seemed insignificant compared to what he had witnessed in other parts of the world. His third job was weekend security at Thornfield Shopping Plaza, a middle-tier mall where his primary responsibilities involved monitoring surveillance cameras and handling minor disturbances. The work was mostly sedentary, which gave his body time to recover from the physical demands of warehouse labor. And the quiet hours allowed him to study business management courses online. Long-term investment in a future where he might provide better opportunities for his son. The schedule was punishing. Warehouse work Monday through Friday. Events serving 3 to 4 evenings per week. Mall security every weekend. But it provided just enough income to cover rent, groceries, Mike's school supplies, and a small emergency fund that grew by $50 each month. More importantly, it kept him busy enough that he rarely had time to dwell on memories that threatened to pull him into darkness. Mrs. Ezra Morrow, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment next door, watched Mike after school on days when Kelvin's schedule required him to work late. She was a retired teacher who had raised 4 kids of her own and seemed to understand that sometimes single parents needed help without needing to explain why. Her apartment smelled like fresh bread and old books, and Mike had developed a habit of doing his homework at her kitchen table while she prepared dinner for her own family. "Your boy's special," she had told Kelvin one evening when he'd come to collect Mike after a late shift at the Meridian Club. "Smart like his father, but he's got something extra. He notices things other kids miss, and he thinks before he acts. Those are good qualities in a man." She had studied Kelvin's face as she spoke, her eyes holding the kind of wisdom that came from decades of observing human nature. "You're doing something right, even if it doesn't feel that way most days." What Mrs. Morrow didn't know, what nobody in Kelvin's current life knew, was that every decision he made was calculated to maintain the delicate balance between providing for his son and protecting him from the consequences of his father's past. The warehouse job kept him physically capable without drawing attention. The server position at the Meridian Club provided exposure to the kind of networking opportunities that might benefit Mike's future while keeping Kelvin himself in the background. The security work maintained his tactical awareness without requiring him to carry weapons or engage in situations that might force him to reveal specialized training. He had constructed their life with the same methodical precision he had once applied to mission planning, but instead of neutralizing threats, he was trying to neutralize his own dangerous capabilities. Every morning when he looked at Mike's sleeping face, he renewed his commitment to being nothing more than a hard-working single father who would give his son every opportunity for a normal, safe, successful life. The irony wasn't lost on him that his greatest fear was also his greatest asset. The skills that made him dangerous were the same skills that allowed him to work multiple demanding jobs without breaking down, to navigate urban challenges that overwhelmed other people, to maintain operational security that protected his son from anyone who might want to use their relationship against him. But last night at the Meridian Club had shattered the careful invisibility he had spent years constructing. In 23 seconds, he had revealed capabilities that couldn't be explained by his official background. Witnesses had recorded video. Police had taken statements. His name was now connected to an incident that would generate media attention and possibly trigger investigations by people with the resources to uncover truths he had worked desperately to bury. As he prepared breakfast for Mike while morning news programs discussed the previous night's heroic waiter on their kitchen television, Kelvin realized that the life he had built was about to change dramatically. The only question was whether he could control that change enough to protect the most important thing in his world, his son's safety and future. "Dad," Mike said, looking up from his cereal bowl with serious brown eyes that missed nothing. "The lady on TV is talking about someone who helped people last night. Was that you?" Kelvin turned off the television and knelt beside his son's chair. "Sometimes grown-ups have to help each other when bad things happen," he said carefully. "That's just what people do." Mike nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with the gravity that characterized all his responses to adult complexities. "Are we still building something important?" "Always," Kelvin replied, pulling his son into a gentle hug. "No matter what changes, we're always building something important." But even as he spoke the words, Kelvin knew that their carefully constructed life of anonymous stability was about to be tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. And the woman whose life he had saved last night possessed resources and influence that could either help him protect his son or destroy everything he had worked to build. Lucian Tharvin surveyed Manhattan from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, 62 floors above the city, his reflection ghosted against the morning skyline like a specter overlooking his domain. At 42, he had assembled a business empire that operated across multiple industries and continents. But unlike traditional moguls who built their wealth through innovation or production, Lucian specialized in acquisition, control, and the strategic elimination of obstacles that stood between him and the technologies he deemed essential for future dominance. His empire existed in the spaces between legitimate business and darker enterprises, carefully structured through layers of shell companies, international partnerships, and financial instruments that made it nearly impossible for regulatory agencies to trace the true source of his influence. He owned telecommunications companies in Eastern Europe, rare earth mining operations in Africa, semiconductor fabrication facilities in Southeast Asia, and cybersecurity firms throughout North America, all connected through a web of cross-investments and shared technologies that gave him unprecedented access to global information flows. The centerpiece of his Manhattan operations was Tharvin Global Strategic Solutions, a consulting firm that provided comprehensive business intelligence and market optimization services to clients who required results rather than explanations about methodology. The company's public face was absolutely legitimate. Teams of Harvard and Wharton graduates produced market analyses, strategic planning documents, and economic forecasts that were genuinely valuable to Fortune 500 companies and government agencies worldwide. What clients didn't know was that Tharvin Global's most effective capabilities came from divisions that didn't appear on organizational charts. Former intelligence operatives provided surveillance and counterintelligence services. Ex-military specialists handled physical security and what corporate euphemisms called personnel management challenges. Financial experts with flexible ethical boundaries facilitated transactions that existed in gray areas of international law. The morning after the failed operation at the Meridian Club, Lucian stood before a wall-mounted display showing real-time market data, news feeds, and operational status reports from his various enterprises. The numbers told a story of continued growth and expanding influence, but they also highlighted the Amara Vaylin problem that had cost him both money and operational credibility. "Explain to me," he said without turning from the display, addressing the woman seated at the conference table behind him, how 3 professional operatives failed to complete a simple extraction operation against a single target in a controlled environment. Dahlia Quenrick, his head of operational security, maintained her composed expression despite the clear danger in his tone. At 38, she had overseen dozens of similar operations across 3 continents, building a reputation for precision that had made her one of the most sought-after specialists in their particular field. Her background included military, intelligence, private security contracting, and consulting work for governments that preferred unofficial solutions to diplomatic problems. The operation proceeded according to plan until an unknown variable intervened, she replied, consulting her tablet for specific details. Target was successfully isolated and controlled. Extraction route was clear. Timeline was within acceptable parameters. Then a member of the catering staff neutralized all 3 operatives using techniques that suggest significant combat training. Lucian turned from the window, his pale blue eyes focusing on her with the intensity that had made powerful executives reconsider their negotiating positions. A waiter. That's what his employment records indicate. Kelvin Verlo, 34. Single father, multiple low-wage jobs to support his son. Clean credit history, no criminal background, honorable discharge from Navy service 3 years ago. She paused. But the preliminary video analysis suggests someone with specialized training far beyond basic military service. Show me. Dahlia activated the room's projection system, displaying footage from multiple security cameras positioned throughout the Meridian Club's ballroom. The video quality was excellent, capturing the operation from several angles as the three operatives executed their planned extraction. Everything proceeded flawlessly until a figure in server's uniform appeared at the edge of the frame. "Here," Dahlia said, slowing the playback to quarter speed. "Watch his movement patterns and technique selection." Even in slow motion, Kelvin's intervention was remarkable to observe. His positioning maximized tactical advantage while minimizing exposure to crossfire. His strikes were precisely calculated to incapacitate without causing permanent injury. His weapon handling demonstrated familiarity with military hardware that went far beyond basic training. Most significantly, his situational awareness and threat assessment suggested someone accustomed to operating in hostile environments, where split-second decisions determine survival. "Special operations," Lucian concluded, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone who had learned to recognize elite capabilities. "Probably Tier 1 assets, based on the precision and tactical awareness. That's our assessment as well. But his service record doesn't reflect that level of training. Either the documentation has been sanitized, or he's been living under deep cover for reasons unrelated to our operation." Lucian studied the frozen image on the screen, showing Kelvin in the moment of engaging the second operative. The man's expression was calm, focused, devoid of the panic or uncertainty that would characterize a civilian thrust into violence. This was someone who had done similar work before, probably under circumstances far more dangerous than a Manhattan ballroom. Background. On the family situation: single father raising a 7-year-old son. Wife died in a car accident 2 years ago, apparently unrelated to his military service. Multiple jobs to make ends meet. Lives in a working-class neighborhood in Queens. No obvious vulnerabilities except the standard pressure points that come with single parenthood. Financial situation: marginal but stable. No significant debt, small savings account, lives within his means. Not wealthy enough to be immune to monetary incentives, but also not desperate enough to make poor decisions out of immediate need. Lucian processed this information while continuing to study the tactical footage. Kelvin Verlo represented exactly the kind of obstacle that required careful handling, someone with the skills to pose a genuine threat, but also the personal attachments that created strategic vulnerability. The challenge was determining whether he could be neutralized through conventional pressure or whether more sophisticated approaches would be necessary. Current status of the three operatives: hospitalized with concussions and various injuries, but they'll recover fully. Police questioning has been limited due to their medical condition, and their cover identities are holding under initial investigation. However, extended scrutiny might reveal connections that would be problematic. Arrange for their medical evacuation to our facility in Montreal. Medical privacy laws will prevent further police access, and we can debrief them properly once they've recovered. Lucian moved away from the projection screen to his desk, where multiple secure communication devices provided connection to assets around the world. "What's the current status of the Valen situation?" She's proceeded with her planned announcement of the NSF partnership. Quantum Dynamics stock increased 12% overnight, and early analysis suggests the partnership will make hostile acquisition significantly more complex. The window for conventional business pressure is essentially closed. Then we move to contingency planning. Valen has forced us to escalate beyond corporate methodology, but she's also revealed that she has access to protection assets we didn't anticipate. That changes the operational parameters significantly. Dahlia consulted her tablet again. Recommendations for the Verlo factor? Comprehensive background investigation first. I want to know who he really is, what he's been doing for the past 3 years, and what kind of protection capabilities he might provide to Valen if they establish a working relationship. Lucian activated one of his secure phones, selecting a contact that would connect him to specialists who handled the most sensitive investigative work. Use the Montreal resources for deep background. Financial records, service history, family situation, psychological profile, everything. And if the investigation reveals significant threat potential? Lucian looked out over Manhattan again, his reflection now clearly visible against the morning sky as clouds moved across the sun. From this height, the millions of people moving through the city below looked like components in a vast machine, each following predictable patterns that could be influenced by the right combination of pressure and incentive. But some components were more complex than others, requiring different approaches to achieve desired outcomes. Everyone has pressure points, Dahlia. Former special operations personnel are actually more vulnerable than civilians in some ways, because they have more to lose and better understanding of what certain kinds of attention can cost them. He turned back to face her. But they're also more dangerous if they decide to resist rather than cooperate. We need to understand exactly which category Mr. Verlo falls into before we make our next move. Timeline for the investigation? 72 hours for preliminary assessment, 1 week for comprehensive analysis. The Valen situation requires resolution before her NSF partnership becomes operational, which gives us approximately 10 days to determine whether Kelvin Verlo is an asset we can acquire or a threat that requires elimination. As Dahlia left to initiate the investigation, Lucian returned his attention to the market displays, showing quantum dynamics' continued rise in value. Amara Valen had played her move brilliantly, using the failed extraction attempt to generate public sympathy, while simultaneously announcing a partnership that made her company nearly impossible to acquire through conventional means. But she had also made a critical error by revealing her connection to someone with Kelvin Verlo's capabilities. That connection created opportunities for pressure that hadn't existed before the ballroom incident. It also created risks that would require careful management. But Lucian had built his empire by turning other people's strengths into weaknesses. Through careful application of leverage, the game had become more complex, but the stakes remained the same: control of quantum computing technology that would determine the balance of power for the next generation. And Lucian Tharvin had never lost a game that mattered to him, regardless of how formidable the opposition appeared to be. The photograph had been taken on a beach in Virginia, showing 12 men in casual clothes celebrating the successful completion of their final training exercise. They looked young, confident, and utterly unaware that within 3 years, only one of them would still be alive. Kelvin kept this picture in a locked drawer beneath his work uniforms, taking it out only on the anniversary of their deaths and on nights when nightmares made sleep impossible. Lieutenant Kelvin Verlo had joined the Navy at 18 with dreams of serving his country and supporting the family he hoped to build someday. His test scores and physical capabilities had placed him in an accelerated track that led to basic underwater demolition SEAL training, where he discovered a natural aptitude for the kind of work that required absolute precision under impossible pressure. His instructors had noted his unusual combination of analytical thinking and intuitive tactical awareness, qualities that made him valuable for operations that demanded both careful planning and split-second improvisation. After completing SEAL training, he'd been selected for Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the elite unit that handled the military's most sensitive and dangerous missions. For 8 years, he had operated in countries whose names rarely appeared in news reports, conducting operations that governments refused to acknowledge and that history books would never record. His call sign during those years had been Anchor, a reference to his ability to provide stability and security for his team regardless of how chaotic situations became. The work had been everything he'd expected, and nothing he could have prepared for. Long deployments in hostile territories where a single mistake could compromise not just his own life, but the lives of his teammates and potentially hundreds of innocent civilians. Missions that required him to make decisions that would have paralyzed most people with their moral complexity. Operations where success was measured not in victory parades, but in threats neutralized before they could materialize into catastrophes. But it had also been profoundly meaningful work. His team had prevented terrorist attacks that could have killed thousands. They had rescued hostages from situations where conventional military or law enforcement responses would have resulted in mass casualties. They had gathered intelligence that helped policymakers make informed decisions about conflicts that threatened regional stability. Each mission had reinforced his belief that the skills he was developing served purposes larger than personal advancement or national pride. The personal cost had been significant but manageable. Relationships with civilian friends became impossible to maintain due to operational security requirements and the psychological distance that developed between people who had seen combat and those who hadn't. Family connections strained under the pressure of long absences and the inability to discuss work that consumed most of his mental energy. But he had found belonging within his team that compensated for the isolation from the broader world. Everything had changed during Operation Lighthouse, a mission to extract a captured intelligence asset from a compound in Yemen that was being used as a planning center for attacks against Western targets. The operation had been planned with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized all their work, with multiple contingency plans for every phase of the extraction. Intelligence reports indicated moderate resistance, minimal civilian presence, and a clear exfiltration route that would allow them to complete the mission with minimal footprint. But the intelligence had been wrong. The compound had been heavily fortified with defensive positions that hadn't appeared in satellite imagery. The captured asset had been moved to a different location, forcing them to adapt their plan in real time while under intense fire. Most critically, the intelligence that had triggered the mission had been compromised, turning their extraction attempt into an ambush that had been planned specifically to eliminate his team. Kelvin had realized the truth during the first minutes of engagement, when the defensive fire had been too precise and too coordinated to represent panicked resistance. Someone had known they were coming, had known their approach route, and had positioned fighters to maximize casualties while minimizing the team's ability to withdraw safely. The mission had been designed to fail, though whether the betrayal had come from human sources or electronic surveillance remained unclear. The next 4 hours had become an exercise in controlled desperation, as his team had fought their way through layers of prepared positions while trying to reach their extraction point. One by one, his teammates had fallen to sniper fire, explosive devices, and coordinated small arms attacks that demonstrated professional military training rather than irregular militia capabilities. By the time support aircraft had arrived to provide covering fire for extraction, Kelvin had been the only member of his team still breathing. The official after-action report had cited equipment failure and faulty intelligence as the primary factors contributing to the mission's outcome. Kelvin had been debriefed extensively, decorated for valor under fire, and offered counseling services to help him process the psychological trauma of losing his entire team. But no investigation had been conducted into how their operational security had been compromised, and no explanation had been provided for the intelligence failures that had made the ambush possible. 6 months later, while reviewing classified reports about related operations, Kelvin had discovered evidence suggesting that Operation Lighthouse had been deliberately sabotaged by someone with access to mission planning information. Financial records indicated unusual transactions between defense contractors and foreign entities in the weeks preceding the mission. Communication intercepts revealed advanced knowledge of American special operations activities, among groups that shouldn't have possessed such information. When he had presented his findings to his commanding officers, requesting a formal investigation into potential security breaches, he had been told that the matter was being handled through appropriate channels and that his continued inquiry was neither necessary nor advisable. His requests for transfer to a different unit had been denied. His applications for advanced training that would have moved him away from operational assignments had been rejected. The message had been clear: he could continue performing missions, while knowing that operational security might be compromised, or he could leave the service entirely. Staying meant accepting the possibility that he might be sent into situations where success was impossible and survival unlikely. Leaving meant abandoning the work that had defined his adult life and the team members who depended on his skills and experience. The decision had been made for him when Sarah had been killed in what police had determined to be a random traffic accident. The drunk driver who had struck her car had no apparent connection to Kelvin's military service, and the investigation had found no evidence of foul play. But the timing, coming just weeks after his inquiries about Operation Lighthouse, had convinced him that remaining in the service would continue to endanger the people he cared about. He had submitted his resignation, accepted his honorable discharge, and disappeared into civilian life with the same thoroughness that had characterized his military operations. New identity documents, carefully constructed employment history, and a background that would satisfy casual investigation, while revealing nothing about his true capabilities or experiences. For 3 years, he had successfully maintained that fiction, becoming exactly what his documentation claimed: a hard-working single father with unremarkable military service, trying to provide a stable life for his son. The skills that had made him valuable to naval special warfare had been suppressed, channeled into civilian activities that kept him physically and mentally prepared without drawing attention to capabilities that could raise uncomfortable questions. But the ballroom at the Meridian Club had shattered that carefully constructed anonymity in 23 seconds. Video footage of his intervention would be analyzed by people with the expertise to recognize elite military training. His name was now connected to an incident that would generate media attention and possibly trigger background investigations by agencies with the resources to discover discrepancies in his official history. More troubling, his intervention had placed him in the orbit of Amara Valen, whose enemies possessed the sophistication and resources to conduct the kind of investigation that could uncover truths he had worked desperately to hide. If Lucian Tharvan's organization included former intelligence assets and most operations, like his did, they would recognize the tactical signatures in the ballroom footage and begin asking questions that could lead them to people who remembered Lieutenant Kelvin Verlodot as he prepared for another shift at the warehouse, moving pallets of frozen food while trying to process the implications of his exposure. Kelvin realized that the life he had built was about to be tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. The question was whether he could protect his son while managing the attention that his moment of heroism had inevitably attracted. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Verlo, this is Amara Valen. I would like to speak with you about a business opportunity that might be mutually beneficial. Please call when convenient." Kelvin stared at the message for several minutes, recognizing it as the moment when his carefully maintained separation between past and present would either be preserved or permanently shattered. Whatever Amara Valen wanted to discuss would force him to make decisions about how much of his true background he was willing to reveal, and to whom. But it would also provide an opportunity to discover whether the woman whose life he had saved possessed the resources and determination necessary to help him protect the most important thing in his world: his son's safety and future in a world where his father's past might make him a target for people who settled disagreements with violence rather than negotiation. 3 days after the Meridian Club incident, Kelvin noticed the surveillance while walking Mike to school through the familiar streets of Ashford Heights. The black sedan had appeared in his peripheral vision twice during their normal route, maintaining careful distance but following predictable patterns that suggested professional observation rather than coincidental travel. His years of operational training had taught him to recognize the subtle signs, vehicles that maintained consistent spacing regardless of traffic conditions, passengers who avoided direct eye contact while remaining focused on his movements, and the particular type of situational awareness that characterized people conducting organized surveillance. He didn't alter his routine immediately, knowing that sudden changes in behavior would confirm to his watchers that their presence had been detected. Instead, he continued walking Mike to PS-247, while using storefront reflections and natural cover to gather information about their surveillance capabilities. The team appeared to consist of at least 3 people working in rotation, suggesting a well-funded operation with sophisticated coordination. They were careful to avoid obvious mistakes, but they weren't invisible to someone trained to recognize professional observation techniques. "Dad, you're walking funny," Mike observed as they approached the school entrance. "Are you okay?" "Just thinking about work stuff," Kelvin replied, kneeling down to adjust his son's backpack straps. The motion allowed him to scan the street behind them without appearing suspicious to casual observers. "Remember what we talked about if anyone you don't know tries to talk to you? Find a teacher immediately and don't go anywhere with strangers," Mike recited dutifully. "But why are you asking? Again, is something wrong?" "Just making sure you remember our safety rules," Kelvin said, pulling his son into a brief hug. "I love you, buddy. Have a good day at school." But as he walked away from the school, Kelvin's mind was already shifting into tactical assessment mode. The surveillance confirmed his worst fears about the consequences of his intervention at the Meridian Club. Someone with significant resources had identified him as a person of interest and was conducting the kind of investigation that would eventually reveal discrepancies in his background story. More troubling, they had obviously connected him to Mike, which meant his son was now potentially at risk from people who might view family members as leverage rather than innocent bystanders. His phone rang during his lunch break at Westfield Depot. The number was blocked, but something about the timing suggested this wasn't a coincidental telemarketing call. "Mr. Verlo." The voice was professional, courteous, and completely unfamiliar. "My name is Victor Castellani. I represent certain business interests that have become aware of your recent activities. I was hoping we could arrange a brief conversation about matters of mutual concern." "I don't know what you're talking about," Kelvin replied, stepping away from his coworkers to continue the conversation privately. "Of course, perhaps I should be more specific. The incident at the Meridian Club has generated considerable interest among my associates. Your particular skill set appears to be significantly more developed than your current employment would suggest." Kelvin felt the familiar coldness settle into his stomach that had always preceded dangerous situations during his military service. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "I don't believe so." Former Lieutenant Kelvin Verlo, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, callsign Anchor. Honorably discharged 3 years ago following the incident in Yemen that resulted in the loss of your entire team. Currently working multiple low-wage jobs while raising your 7-year-old son, Michael, alone following the tragic death of your wife, Sarah. The casual recitation of classified information that should have been accessible only to people with high-level security clearances confirmed Kelvin's assessment that he was dealing with a sophisticated operation backed by serious resources. More importantly, the specific mention of Mike by name represented exactly the kind of threat he had spent 3 years trying to avoid. "What do you want?" he asked, abandoning any pretense that his identity remained secret. A simple conversation. Nothing threatening, nothing dramatic. Just a business discussion between professionals who understand the complexities of modern security challenges. "There's a cafe called Riverside Grounds on Northern Boulevard. Can you meet me there in 1 hour? Kelvin almost smiled at the location choice. Riverside Grounds was a small neighborhood cafe with limited parking, multiple exits, and clear sight lines in all directions, exactly the kind of venue someone would choose if they wanted to demonstrate that they understood tactical considerations, while minimizing the possibility of surveillance or recording by external parties. 1 hour, he agreed. And Mr. Castellana? If I see anyone I don't recognize within 3 blocks of my son's school, our conversation will be very different than the one you're planning. Understood completely. I look forward to our discussion. Kelvin spent the 45 minutes before the meeting conducting counter-surveillance measures that confirmed his suspicions about the professional nature of the operation targeting him. The team following him was competent, but not exceptional, suggesting that their primary mission was observation rather than immediate action. That distinction was important because it indicated that whoever was behind the surveillance still viewed negotiation as preferable to direct confrontation. Riverside Grounds proved to be exactly what he had expected. A modest establishment with decent coffee and the kind of layout that allowed for private conversation without creating obvious security vulnerabilities. Victor Castellana was waiting at a corner table, dressed in an expensive but understated suit that suggested success. Without drawing attention, he appeared to be in his mid-40s, with the kind of careful grooming and situational awareness that characterized people accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. "Mr. Verlo," he said, rising to shake hands with practiced professionalism. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." "Coffee? I'll get my own," Kelvin replied, maintaining the tactical advantage of controlling his own food and beverage consumption. When he returned to the table with a simple black coffee, Victor was reviewing what appeared to be a standard business portfolio. "I'll be direct," Victor began. "My employer has developed significant interest in quantum dynamics and its founder, Amara Valen. Recent events have suggested that Ms. Valen may be expanding her security arrangements to include personnel with specialized capabilities. Your intervention at the Meridian Club demonstrated exactly the kind of skills that such arrangements might require. I helped someone who was in trouble. That's all. Your modesty is admirable, but unnecessary. The tactical footage has been analyzed by people qualified to recognize elite military training. Your background investigation has revealed service history that explains your capabilities. We're not here to debate what happened or why you were capable of such an effective response." Victor opened the portfolio, revealing photographs that made Kelvin's blood run cold. Images of Mike walking to school, playing in the neighborhood park, sitting at Mrs. Marrow's kitchen table doing homework. The pictures were clearly recent, taken with professional equipment from concealed positions that demonstrated sophisticated surveillance capabilities. "Your son is a remarkable boy," Victor continued conversationally. "Intelligent, well-behaved, obviously loved and well cared for, despite the challenging circumstances of single parenthood. His teachers speak very highly of his academic performance and social development." "Get to the point," Kelvin said, his voice flat with controlled anger. "The point is that excellent parents often face difficult choices when circumstances change unexpectedly. Your current employment provides adequate income for basic needs, but hardly the kind of resources that could ensure optimal opportunities for a child with Michael's potential. Private schools, college preparation, extracurricular activities, travel experiences, all the advantages that wealthy families take for granted, but that remain beyond reach for working-class single fathers. Victor slid a business card across the table. "My employer is prepared to offer you a position that would immediately resolve those financial limitations. Executive protection services for high-value clients, starting salary of $300,000 annually, full benefits package including college fund contributions for your son, Flexible scheduling that would allow you to maintain active involvement in his daily life. In exchange for what? Professional services that align with your established skill set. Nothing illegal, nothing that would compromise your moral principles. Simply the application of your expertise to protect clients who face the kind of sophisticated threats that require specialized responses. Kelvin studied the business card, noting the minimalist design that provided no information beyond a phone number and the name Castellana Strategic Consulting. Everything about the offer was designed to appeal to his practical concerns while avoiding specifics that might reveal the true nature of the work being proposed. And if I decline? Victor's expression remained pleasant, but something shifted in his eyes that reminded Kelvin of predators evaluating prey. Then you continue with your current lifestyle, of course. Multiple low-wage jobs, constant financial pressure, limited opportunities for your son's advancement. Though I should mention that economic circumstances can change rapidly in today's volatile market. Workplace accidents, unexpected medical expenses, housing costs, educational needs, so many variables that can impact a family's stability. The threat was delivered with the kind of professional courtesy that made it more menacing than direct intimidation would have been. Victor was making it clear that declining his offer would result in systematic pressure designed to destabilize Kelvin's carefully constructed life until cooperation became the only viable option for protecting his son's welfare. I need time to consider your offer, Kelvin said finally. Of course. These are important decisions that require careful thought. Take the weekend to discuss the situation with your son. Consider the opportunities this arrangement could provide for his future. I'll contact you Monday morning for your decision. Victor closed the portfolio and prepared to leave, but paused as if remembering an afterthought. Oh, and Mr. Verlo? Ms. Valen contacted you recently about a business opportunity. I would strongly recommend declining any proposal she might make. Her current situation has become quite complicated, and association with her organization could prove detrimental to people who value privacy and stability. After Victor left, Kelvin remained at the table for several minutes, processing the implications of the conversation while analyzing his limited options. The offer itself was probably legitimate in its financial terms, but the work would almost certainly involve activities that violated his moral principles and potentially placed him in legal jeopardy. More importantly, accepting employment with people who had threatened his son would create a dependency relationship that could be exploited indefinitely, but declining the offer would trigger the kind of systematic harassment that could destroy the life he had built for Mike. Financial pressure, workplace accidents, housing problems, educational interference, all delivered with the plausible deniability that would make it impossible to prove deliberate targeting while making normal life impossible to maintain. His phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Morrow. Mike is safe at my apartment doing homework. Some strange men were asking questions about you both in the neighborhood. I think you should come home. Kelvin left the cafe immediately, his mind already shifting into the tactical planning mode that had kept him alive during 8 years of special operations. The direct threat to his son had crossed the line from negotiation to warfare, and the skills he had spent 3 years suppressing were about to become necessary for protecting the most important thing in his world. But first, he needed to make a phone call that would either provide allies in the conflict that was now inevitable, or confirm that he was facing this battle alone. Amara Valen's business opportunity might represent his only chance to obtain the resources and support necessary to protect Mike from people who viewed family members as acceptable collateral damage in their pursuit of business objectives. The war for his son's safety was about to begin. And Kelvin Verlo was then pretending to be an ordinary single father who could be intimidated by people who mistook his preference for peaceful anonymity as weakness or lack of capability. Kelvin's hands were steady as he dialed Amara Valen's number while walking quickly through the crowded streets of Midtown Manhattan, using the foot traffic and urban noise to mask his conversation from potential surveillance. He had left work early, citing a family emergency that wasn't entirely fabricated, and spent 40 minutes conducting counter-surveillance measures to ensure he could communicate without being monitored by Victor Castellana's organization, Ms. Valen, he said when she answered on the second ring. "This is Kelvin Verlo. I believe we need to talk immediately." "I was hoping you would call," she replied, her voice carrying the kind of focused attention that suggested she was already aware that their situation had evolved beyond simple business opportunities. "I assume recent events have made our conversation more urgent than either of us anticipated. Your assumption is correct. Are you available to meet in person within the next hour?" "Absolutely." "Do you have a location preference that addresses your security concerns?" The fact that she immediately understood the tactical implications of their meeting confirmed Kelvin's assessment that Amara Valeen was not naive about the dangers she faced or the resources that might be necessary to address them effectively. "Grand Central Terminal, main concourse, near the information booth. 45 minutes. I'll be there." Grand Central provided exactly the kind of environment Kelvin needed for this conversation. Massive crowds that made surveillance difficult. Multiple exit routes, excellent sight lines for threat assessment, and enough ambient noise to prevent electronic eavesdropping without sophisticated equipment. He arrived 20 minutes early, conducting a thorough reconnaissance of the concourse to identify potential observation positions and escape routes, while maintaining the appearance of a commuter checking train schedules. Amara appeared precisely on time, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater that suggested she understood the value of avoiding attention in public spaces. She moved through the crowd with the confident navigation of someone accustomed to urban environments. But Kelvin also noticed the subtle ways she positioned herself to maintain awareness of potential threat skills that indicated professional security training or extensive experience with personal protection protocols. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as they found a relatively quiet position near one of the departure boards. "I assume the urgency relates to pressure you've received regarding our potential association. Someone claiming to represent business interests made contact today. They demonstrated knowledge of my background and made specific threats regarding my son's safety if I choose to work with you." Kelvin kept his voice level despite the anger that threatened to surface whenever he thought about the photographs Victor had displayed. "They also offered me employment that would presumably involve activities contrary to your interests. Lucian Tharvin's organization moves quickly when they identify potential obstacles," Amara replied, her expression hardening with the kind of focused determination that had built her company into a global technology leader. "What exactly did they propose?" "Executive protection services for high-value clients, substantial salary, benefits package including college funding for my son, in exchange for unspecified professional services that would presumably align with my military background. And the alternative if you declined? Systematic pressure designed to destabilize my family's situation until cooperation became necessary for survival. Workplace accidents, financial difficulties, educational problems for my son, all delivered with plausible deniability but obvious intent." Amara studied his face with the analytical intensity she probably applied to complex technical problems. "What's your assessment of their operational capabilities?" "Professional team with significant resources and government-level access to classified information. They know details about my military service that should be accessible only to people with high security clearances. Their surveillance is competent, though not exceptional, suggesting they're more accustomed to corporate intelligence than active operations, which means they're dangerous but not invincible." She paused, clearly processing strategic implications. "What did you tell them?" "That I needed time to consider the offer. They're expecting my decision Monday morning. That gives us approximately 60 hours to determine whether we can work together effectively, and if so, how to neutralize the threat they represent to both our interests. Amara gestured toward a quieter area near the windows overlooking Lexington Avenue. Let me explain what I know about Lucian Tharvan's organization and what I'm prepared to offer in terms of mutual protection. As they walked to a position that provided better operational security, Kelvin found himself reassessing his initial impression of Amara Valen. Her public image emphasized her role as a brilliant scientist and innovative entrepreneur, but her tactical awareness and strategic thinking suggested someone who had learned to operate effectively in environments where intellectual capability alone was insufficient for survival. Tharvan Global Strategic Solutions operates as a legitimate consulting firm, but their most effective capabilities come from divisions that provide services ranging from industrial espionage to personnel elimination. She began, her voice low, enough to avoid attracting attention from nearby travelers. They've been pressuring quantum dynamics for 8 months, using increasingly aggressive methods as conventional business tactics proved ineffective. The incident at the Meridian Club was an escalation beyond corporate pressure. Exactly. Which means they've committed to resolving the quantum dynamics situation through methods that can't be reversed or negotiated. Your intervention saved my life, but it also revealed that I have access to protection capabilities they hadn't anticipated. Now they're trying to neutralize that advantage by recruiting you or eliminating you as a factor. Kelvin processed this information while maintaining awareness of the crowds moving around them. What exactly are you proposing? Partnership. Your expertise in personal protection and tactical operations, combined with my resources and technological capabilities. Together, we neutralize Tharvan's organization permanently while ensuring that quantum computing technology remains accessible for beneficial purposes rather than being controlled by people who would weaponize it for personal gain. That's not a business opportunity. That's a war. Yes, Amara replied without hesitation. But it's a war that's already started, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. Tharvan has demonstrated that he's willing to use violence to achieve his objectives. Your son is already at risk simply because you helped me. The question isn't whether we're going to fight, but whether we're going to fight together or separately. Kelvin looked out over the concourse, watching hundreds of people move through their daily routines without any awareness of the conversation that was determining whether their access to future technology would be controlled by innovative scientists or predatory criminals. The weight of that responsibility was daunting, but not as compelling as the immediate threat to Mike's safety. What specific resources are you offering? Immediate relocation to secure housing for you and your son, with full protection detail, until the threat is resolved. Financial support equivalent to the salary Tharvan offered, but without the moral compromises their employment would require. Long-term opportunities within Quantum Dynamics Security Division, if you choose to continue working with us after this situation is resolved. And what would you expect from me? Tactical analysis of Tharvan's capabilities and vulnerabilities. Strategic planning for operations designed to neutralize their threat permanently. Personal protection services during the period when direct confrontation becomes necessary. Essentially, the application of your military expertise to a situation that requires specialized skills most civilian security firms don't possess. Kelvin weighed the proposal carefully, recognizing both its potential benefits and its inherent risks. Working with Amara would provide resources necessary to protect Mike while confronting people who had already demonstrated their willingness to threaten innocent family members. But it would also commit him to a course of action that would inevitably require using skills he had hoped never to employ again. There's something you should understand about my background, he said finally. The military service that gives me the capabilities you need also comes with psychological costs that make extended conflict problematic. I've spent 3 years learning to live as a civilian specifically because the person I was during active service wasn't someone I wanted my son to know. I understand that concern, and I respect your commitment to being the kind of father Mike deserves. But the people threatening him won't be stopped by appeals to decency or legal remedies. Sometimes protecting the people we love requires accepting temporary compromises with our ideal selves. Amara's response revealed an understanding of moral complexity that suggested she had faced similar decisions in her own life. Building a technology company in an industry dominated by people who prioritized power over principles had presumably required her to make choices that conflicted with her academic ideals about scientific collaboration and open research. "If I agree to work with you," Kelvin said, "I need guarantees about operational parameters. No activities that target innocent people. No permanent solutions that could be achieved through less extreme methods. No operations that would place my son at greater risk than he already faces." Agreed completely. Tharvan's organization has forfeited any claim to restraint by threatening your family, but that doesn't mean we abandon our own moral principles in responding to their tactics. Kelvin made his decision based on strategic analysis rather than emotional reaction, though the anger he felt about threats to his son certainly influenced his willingness to accept risks he would normally avoid. "I'll work with you, but on one condition that's non-negotiable, which is, if at any point this partnership places my son in greater danger than he would face if I simply accepted Tharvan's offer, I reserve the right to withdraw and pursue that alternative regardless of the broader implications for your situation." "That's completely reasonable," Amara replied immediately. "Your son's safety is the priority that makes all other considerations secondary." They shook hands with the formality of people entering a business partnership, but Kelvin recognized the gesture as something more significant. Two people with complementary capabilities committing to a course of action that would either neutralize a serious threat or destroy both their lives in the attempt. As they prepared to leave Grand Central through separate exits to avoid creating surveillance opportunities for potential watchers, Amara handed him a secure phone and an address written on business card stock. "Safe house in Westchester County," she explained. "Bring Mike there tonight. Security team will meet you at the location to provide briefing and protection detail. We'll begin operational planning tomorrow morning." "And Victor Castellane's Monday deadline?" "You'll keep that appointment and deliver a message that should clarify the new dynamics of this situation. Specifically, that Kelvin Verlo is no longer an isolated target they can intimidate with threats against his family." As Kelvin walked toward the subway entrance that would take him back to Queens, he felt the familiar mental shift that had always preceded dangerous operations during his military service. The careful civilian routine he had maintained for 3 years was about to be replaced by tactical planning, threat assessment, and the kind of strategic thinking that required him to become someone he had hoped never to be again. But Mike's safety was worth any personal cost, and the people who had mistaken his preference for peaceful anonymity as weakness were about to discover exactly who they had chosen to threaten. The safe house in Westchester County looked like any other upscale suburban home from the street, but Kelvin's trained eye immediately recognized the subtle modifications that transformed it into a secure facility. Reinforced window frames that could stop small arms fire, discrete cameras providing complete perimeter coverage, landscaping designed to eliminate concealment opportunities for potential intruders, and the kind of communication equipment that suggested connectivity to sophisticated monitoring systems. Mike had accepted the sudden relocation with the adaptability that 7-year-olds somehow managed when their parents presented changes as adventures rather than emergencies. He'd packed his favorite books and toys without complaint, trusted that Mrs. Marrow would take care of their apartment while they were away, and settled into the guest bedroom with curiosity about their temporary new surroundings rather than anxiety about the disruption to his routine. "This place has a really good kitchen," he observed while exploring the house with Kelvin after their arrival. "And there's a game room with actual arcade machines. Are we staying here because of your new job with the nice lady from the restaurant?" "Something like that," Kelvin replied, once again impressed by his son's ability to process complex situations without being overwhelmed by details he couldn't control. "We're going to be here for a while until some work stuff gets sorted out." "Okay. Can I call Mrs. Marrow later to tell her we got here safely?" "Absolutely." The security team that Amara had arranged proved to be exactly what Kelvin had hoped for: former military and law enforcement personnel with the kind of professional competence that inspired confidence rather than concern. Their leader, a former Marine gunnery sergeant named Carl Malrick, briefed Kelvin on the facility's capabilities while Mike explored the game room under the watchful supervision of a female operative who specialized in family protection assignments. Perimeter is monitored 24/7 with both electronic surveillance and physical patrols, Carl explained as they reviewed the house's security protocols. Communications are encrypted and routed through servers that can't be traced to this location. Food service, medical support, and educational resources are all available on site if extended residence becomes necessary. How long can this facility operate independently? Indefinitely, if required. Solar power with battery backup, water, filtration system, food storage for 6 months, fully equipped medical facility, and communication systems that function regardless of external infrastructure. Kelvin nodded approvingly. The level of preparation indicated that Amara took security seriously and possessed resources that most private citizens couldn't access. "What's the operational security status for this location?" "Completely compartmentalized. Property ownership is buried through shell companies that can't be traced to Quantum Dynamics or Ms. Vileen personally. Staff assignments are rotated to prevent pattern recognition. All communication with external contacts is routed through secure channels that maintain operational anonymity. And if this location is compromised, 3 backup facilities with identical capabilities, plus extraction protocols that can relocate. Protected personnel within 30 minutes of threat identification." Carl's briefing confirmed that working with Amara provided access to resources that would be necessary for protecting Mike while confronting an organization with Tharvan's capabilities. More importantly, the professionalism of her security arrangements suggested that she understood the difference between corporate protection and the kind of operational security required when facing opponents who were willing to target family members. Amara arrived that evening for their first strategic planning session, bringing with her a comprehensive intelligence package that demonstrated the depth of resources she had been applying to the Tharvan investigation. They met in the house's secure conference room, which featured communication equipment that allowed for encrypted video conferences with her technical staff at Quantum Dynamics headquarters. "Before we discuss operational planning," she began, "I want to address the personal aspects of our situation. Your son's protection is the absolute priority for everything we do going forward. Carl's team has instructions that Mike's safety supersedes all other considerations, including my own security and the broader objectives of our partnership." "I appreciate that commitment," Kelvin replied. "But I also want you to understand that if protecting him requires me to abandon our partnership, that's exactly what I'll do regardless of the consequences for your situation. I would expect nothing less from a good father. The fact that you prioritize your son's welfare over strategic objectives is one of the reasons I believe we can work together effectively." Amara activated the conference room's display system, showing detailed files on Tharvan Global Strategic Solutions that revealed the true scope of the organization they were confronting. Financial records, personnel databases, operational histories, communication intercepts intelligence that would have required months of professional investigation to compile. "How did you obtain this information?" Kelvin asked, studying organizational charts that showed connections between Tharvan's legitimate businesses and less official activities. Quantum dynamics has been targeted by industrial espionage for 2 years, she replied. I've been conducting defensive intelligence operations during that entire period, which provided opportunities to gather information about the organizations targeting us. Some of it comes from electronic surveillance, some from human sources, and some from financial analysis that reveals patterns of activity. This level of intelligence gathering suggests capabilities beyond what most technology companies possess. Correct. I've been building relationships with government agencies and private security firms that share our concerns about technology theft and corporate espionage. Protecting quantum computing research has required resources that go beyond traditional business security. The intelligence package revealed that Tharvan's organization was far more extensive and dangerous than Kelvin had initially assessed. Operations in 12 countries, connections to foreign intelligence services, a history of personnel elimination disguised as accidents or suicides, and financial resources that allowed them to maintain pressure on targets indefinitely. Victor Castellana is their director of personnel acquisition, Amara explained, highlighting his photograph and service record. Former CIA case officer specializing in recruitment and asset development. He's responsible for identifying individuals with valuable skills and either recruiting them voluntarily or creating circumstances that force cooperation, which explains his approach with me. Offer attractive employment while simultaneously creating pressure that makes acceptance appear to be the only viable option. Exactly. But his methods work because most targets are isolated and lack resources to resist sustained pressure. Our partnership changes that dynamic significantly. They spent 3 hours reviewing intelligence on Tharvan's operational structure, identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited and developing strategic options for neutralizing the threat his organization represented. Kelvin's military experience provided tactical analysis that complemented Amara's understanding of corporate and technological vulnerabilities, creating a comprehensive assessment of their opponent's capabilities and weaknesses. Their primary advantage is deniability, Kelvin concluded after studying their operational history. Everything they do is structured to provide legal protection and political cover if their activities are exposed. But that same structure creates communication delays and coordination problems that can be exploited by opponents willing to act more directly, which means we need to force them into situations where their operational security becomes a liability rather than an asset. Correct. But that requires accepting risks that most corporate security arrangements avoid. Are you prepared for operations that might require methods your legal advisors would strongly discourage? Amara's expression hardened with the resolve that had allowed her to build a revolutionary technology company despite opposition from established industry giants. Tharvan's organization forfeited any claim to legal protection when they threatened your son. I'm prepared to use whatever methods prove necessary to ensure they can never threaten innocent family members again. Their planning session extended past midnight, developing contingency plans for multiple scenarios, ranging from defensive protection to active operations designed to eliminate Tharvan's organization permanently. By the time they concluded, Kelvin felt confident that their partnership provided realistic chances for protecting Mike while neutralizing a threat that conventional law enforcement agencies would be unable to address effectively. Tomorrow you keep your appointment with Victor Castellana, Amara said as they prepared to conclude the session. But instead of accepting or declining his offer, you're going to deliver a message that should clarify the new parameters of this conflict, which is that Kelvin Verlo is no longer an isolated target they can intimidate with threats against his family, and that continuing their current course of action will result in consequences they haven't anticipated. As Amara prepared to leave, she paused at the conference room door to deliver one final thought. I want you to know that I understand the personal cost of what I'm asking you to do. using skills that you've spent years suppressing, accepting. Risks that could separate you from your son, becoming someone you hoped never to be again. None of that is fair to ask of anyone. But it's necessary. Yes, and the fact that you're willing to accept those costs to protect him makes me confident that we're going to succeed. After she left, Kelvin checked on Mike, who had fallen asleep in his new bedroom surrounded by toys and books that made the transition feel more like an adventure than an emergency relocation. Looking at his son's peaceful face, Kelvin renewed his commitment to ensuring that Mike would never have to know the details of what his father was about to do to keep him safe. The war with Tharvin's organization was about to begin in earnest. But for the first time since Victor Castellana's initial contact, Kelvin felt confident that he possessed the resources and allies necessary to protect the most important thing in his world while neutralizing a threat that had underestimated both his capabilities and his determination to defend his family. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable clarity, the kind of crisp autumn day that made Manhattan's skyline appear sharper and more defined than usual. Kelvin approached Riverside grounds with the measured confidence of someone who had spent the weekend transforming from isolated target into operational asset. Backed by sophisticated resources and professional allies, Victor Castellana was waiting at the same corner table, dressed impeccably as before, but Kelvin immediately noticed subtle changes in his demeanor that suggested the weekend had brought developments he hadn't anticipated. The careful composure remained intact, but there was tension around his eyes that indicated his organization had encountered unexpected complications. "Mr. Verlo," Victor said, rising to shake hands with practiced courtesy. "I trust you've had adequate time to consider our proposal." "I have," Kelvin replied, taking the offered seat while maintaining the tactical awareness that had become second nature. "But first, I think you should know that your surveillance teams were compromised yesterday evening. All 3 vehicles. 6 personnel total, currently in federal custody on charges related to unauthorized monitoring of government contractors." Victor's expression remained professionally neutral, but the slight tightening around his eyes confirmed that this information was both accurate and problematic for his organization's operations. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Of course you are. Just like you're aware that your organization's financial records have been subpoenaed by the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and that Lucian Tharvin is currently answering questions about international money transfers had violated several banking regulations." The color drained from Victor's face as he realized that the weekend had fundamentally altered the balance of power in their conflict. Whatever resources Kelvin had accessed were far more sophisticated than a simple corporate security arrangement, suggesting connections to government agencies that could make Tharvin Global's carefully constructed legal protections irrelevant. "Ms. Valen's resources are more extensive than we anticipated," Victor said carefully. "Much more extensive. But here's what's really important for you to understand. The offer you made regarding my employment is no longer relevant because the organization you represent no longer exists in any meaningful sense." Kelvin leaned forward slightly, allowing Victor to see the complete confidence that came from knowing his son was protected by people whose capabilities far exceeded anything Tharvin's organization could deploy. Quantum Dynamics has been designated as critical national infrastructure under the Defense Production Act. Any further attempts to interfere with their operations or threaten their personnel will be treated as matters of national security rather than corporate disputes. And my personal situation? That depends entirely on your next decisions. Cooperation with federal investigators will result in witness protection and relocation to a country without extradition treaties. Continued loyalty to an organization that's about to be dismantled will result in prosecution for conspiracy, terrorism financing, and accessory charges related to multiple homicides. Victor processed this information while clearly calculating his extremely limited options. The careful professional demeanor that had characterized their previous meeting was replaced by the desperate awareness of someone whose career had just been terminated by forces beyond his control. What exactly are you proposing? Complete cooperation with the investigation into Tharvan Global's operations. Full disclosure of personnel, financial records, operational histories, and client relationships. In exchange, federal prosecutors will recommend minimum sentences and protective custody for people who provide valuable testimony. The conversation concluded 20 minutes later with Victor's agreement to surrender himself to federal agents, who had been positioned around the cafe throughout their meeting. As he was escorted away, Kelvin felt the profound relief that came from knowing the threat to his family had been permanently eliminated. Within 6 months, Lucian Tharvan's empire had been completely dismantled through coordinated law enforcement actions across multiple jurisdictions. His assets were frozen, his associates were imprisoned or fled to countries without extradition agreements, and his organization's capabilities were transferred to legitimate security firms that operated within legal boundaries. Kelvin's transformation from isolated single father to trusted security consultant proved to be exactly the kind of career change that provided both financial stability and meaningful work. Quantum Dynamics Security Division expanded rapidly under his leadership, focusing on protecting innovative technologies from the kind of predatory corporate practices that had nearly destroyed Amara's company. Most importantly, Mike's safety was no longer dependent on his father's ability to maintain dangerous anonymity. Instead, it was protected by legitimate employment that used Kelvin's skills for purposes he could explain with pride rather than conceal with carefully constructed lies. The man who had spent 3 years hiding from his past had discovered that some skills were too valuable to remain buried, especially when they could be used to protect the people and principles that mattered most. 18 months later, Mike Verlo celebrated his 9th birthday in the backyard of their new home in Scarsdale, a spacious colonial house with a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree and enough room for the kind of childhood adventures that had been impossible in their Queens apartment. The transformation in their circumstances was remarkable, but even more significant was the transformation in the relationships that defined their daily lives. Amara arrived precisely at 2 p.m., carrying a wrapped telescope that she'd selected specifically for Mike's growing fascination with astronomy. Her relationship with Kelvin had evolved gradually from professional partnership to personal friendship to something deeper and more meaningful than either had initially expected. She moved through their home with the comfortable familiarity of someone who belonged there, helping to arrange birthday decorations while engaging Mike in animated discussions about lunar phases and planetary orbits. "Did you know that Saturn's rings are made of billions of ice particles?" Mike asked her while unwrapping the telescope with the careful attention that characterized all his interactions with complex objects. "And that some of them are as small as snowflakes while others are as big as houses?" "I did know that," Amara replied, settling beside him on the grass. "But did you know that with this telescope, you'll be able to see those rings yourself instead of just reading about them in books?" The birthday party reflected the expanded community that had grown around their family during the past year. Carl Malrick and several members of Quantum Dynamics' security team had become regular fixtures in their lives, providing Mike with positive male role models who understood both his father's background and the unique challenges of growing up in a family where security remained a practical consideration rather than an abstract concern. That Mrs. Marrow had relocated to a comfortable apartment nearby, maintaining her role as Mike's after-school caregiver while enjoying the financial security that came from Kelvin's dramatically improved circumstances. Her presence provided continuity with their previous life while adapting to opportunities that had once seemed impossible. "Your father is a remarkable man," she told Mike while they arranged birthday cake slices with mathematical precision that honored both their family traditions and Kelvin's ingrained attention to detail. He's learned to use his special talents to help people instead of hiding them away. That takes courage most people never have to develop. As the afternoon progressed, Kelvin found himself observing the celebration with the kind of gratitude that came from understanding how close they had come to losing everything. Mike's laughter as he experimented with his new telescope, Amara's obvious joy in contributing to his son's education and development, the relaxed camaraderie of friends who had become extended family, all of it represented the kind of ordinary happiness that had seemed permanently beyond reach during their years of careful anonymity. "Are you happy, Dad?" Mike asked as they cleaned up after the party, his serious brown eyes studying his father's face with the perceptive attention that missed nothing important. "Completely," Kelvin replied, pulling his son into a gentle hug. "Are you?" "Yes, but I have a question about something Mrs. Marrow said." Mike paused with the thoughtful consideration that preceded his most important observations. "She said you used to hide your special talents, but now you use them to help people. Does that mean you're not hiding anymore?" Kelvin considered his response carefully, recognizing the opportunity to share wisdom that might prove valuable as Mike continued to develop his own understanding of courage, purpose, and authentic living. "I spent a long time thinking that keeping my ability secret would keep us safe. But I learned that sometimes the things we try to hide are exactly the things that can help us protect the people we love. Like how you helped Miss Amara when those bad men tried to hurt her. Exactly like that. Sometimes being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when it's difficult or dangerous." Mike nodded solemnly, processing this information with the gravity he applied to all adult concepts that contained important life lessons. So hiding isn't always the safest thing to do. Not always. Sometimes the safest thing is to be honest about who we are and use our abilities to make the world better for the people we care about. As they finished cleaning and prepared for the evening routine that had become comfortable rather than regimented, Kelvin reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The man who had spent 3 years working multiple jobs while suppressing his most valuable capabilities had discovered that true security came not from hiding his strengths, but from using them in service of principles that made him proud. The waiter who had saved a CEO's life had become a security consultant whose work protected innovative technologies that could benefit humanity. The isolated single father had found partnership with someone who shared his values and supported his commitment to raising his son with integrity. The former operator who had lost his team had built a new community of people whose safety and success had become his mission. True strength, he had finally learned, wasn't found in perfect self-sufficiency or flawless control of circumstances. It emerged in the courage to build authentic connections despite their inherent vulnerabilities, to love deeply despite understanding loss, and to step forward in service of others despite the personal costs that courage sometimes required. Most importantly, he had discovered that heroes weren't born in extraordinary circumstances, but forged in the daily decisions of ordinary people who refused to stand by when others needed help, even when helping required risking everything they had worked to build. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.